Okay, Mike. I'm going to just let the final folks in now. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining this Teams voice session and webinar with Mike Gilroy-Scott and myself, Mike Whedon at Formation. Really appreciate taking times out of your busy diaries. I know we live on video these days, but really appreciate everyone coming in and being part of the session. The session will be recorded today. We've also got transcription included in the session, so we will, after the session, of course, be sending the recording and the slides that we use just for your own personal review after. And equally, if there are any questions that come up during the session, please do use the chat function. Mike and I will talk hopefully for about 30 minutes of the webinar through the different agenda, which I'll run through shortly, and we'll look to address any questions at the end. And equally, if the session is really pertinent to you guys, if you are looking at voice enabling Teams right now, we'd love to speak to you after. You can come for one-to-one sessions, ask further questions offline if you so need to. And I think the final piece is this is the start of a series of webinars that we'll be doing on a monthly basis. So feedback is always welcome. Topics equally. We know Microsoft, and you look at the Microsoft 365 stack, so much development going on outside of just voice itself, of course. Mike and I will be doing future sessions. So if there's anything you particularly want to look at or want to know more about, please do give us feedback. And Mike and I sadly, we'll geek up on it on the Microsoft side of things and provide those updates accordingly. So without further ado, my name, as I said, is Mike Whedon, Sales Director here at Formation, and I've got my Teams guru, Mike Gilroy-Scott, Head of Technology. And as flow of the session, I'll be asking Mike a number of questions around the Teams 101 for voice enabling Teams, and we'll go through some of those elements. But Mike, kicking off the session, thank you very much for joining me. Mike, you've been in the industry for 17 years, I believe. Microsoft Teams in the last 12 to 18 months has rocketed. We're for our sins of voice specialists. How long did it take you, Mike, to really get your head around moving away from that traditional PBX, cloud UCAS to go, do you know what, Teams is actually a really viable solution, and it's come on leaps and bounds? Give us your background on that first and foremost, Mike.
Absolutely. Mike, as you said, unfortunately, I've been working in the comms and IT managed services for 17 or 18 years now, so hopefully got a decent understanding of the market and how things work in the PBX world. And obviously from Microsoft Teams, it's a bit of a phenomenon from Microsoft. This is their fastest ever growing product, 145 million daily active users, which has come on obviously in leaps and bounds over the last 18 months or so. So, it's what, 3-4 years old, Microsoft Teams now. It's still in its infancy, I think, as a product, but it's reached maturity very quickly. The voice element of it was not as an afterthought. It was always planned, but I think, from the Skype for Business world, it didn't have quite the same maturity as the voice platform there. So it took Microsoft a couple of years to really get going on that front and sort of port across those kind of features to get some parity and in some cases exceed the capabilities of Skype for Business, which I think is where we are at the moment. And it's really exciting time because now it's a really viable voice solution you should use. I hesitate to say PBX replacement because that sort of conjures up connotations that you rip out your PBX, you put in Teams, and it'll do exactly the same things as your PBX would do. I mean, it can do most of the things that your PBX can do, but it just, because it's a collaboration platform, not a PBX, it's just going to do them in a slightly different way. And hopefully today we're going to cover some topics about things you need to be aware of, that if you're considering this Microsoft journey and you want to invest in Teams as a voice solution, we're going to cover some of those things for you today.
Thanks, Mike. So yeah, as a purist, fully back it, and as it's seen, it's been awesome for us and all the customers we've already converted and migrated across. It just works, and it's a solid platform. So in terms of agenda, Mike, as I said, we're going to cover quite a few topics. So we'll try and keep each to a level that the audience is relevant for. And as I said, if anyone wants to go into more detail at the end. So first and foremost, we're going to talk about the modern workplace. What that means in terms of Microsoft's playbook around Office 365, Microsoft 365, where Teams fits into that from a voice perspective, but the other elements that build in that ecosystem. We'll then go into sort of demystifying the three different routes. There's direct routing, there's Microsoft calling plans, and there's now Carrier Connect for Teams options. We'll go into those elements. We'll then go into, I guess, where formation come into the fold of our 5-step approach of a Teams deployment, and that's starting at network readiness, all the way through to Teams user and adoption and everything in between, the session border controllers. We'll talk through elements of that and things to look out for if you are deploying or looking to go as a voice option on Teams. And then finally, moving into some of the features that Mike alluded to in terms of more compliant things, like if you're a company that needs voice recording, if you need a reporting suite like you would get on your traditional PBX, real historical balance sheet for your phone system type things. There's absolutely third-party integrations that we and Teams can integrate to, so we'll talk through that. And then the final piece is really around the physical things in life. These bad boys that we all look like Madonna on a daily basis now, headsets as we return to the office, video integration is going to be a big thing, and importantly, third-party integration, which we'll go into as well. So quite a lot to cover, but we'll try and keep it concise. And we won't kill you with PowerPoint by any means. There's only about 4 or 5 slides. I'm just going to bring up to set the scene on the first slide, if you bear with me. And this is all around the modern workplace. So Mike, 4 pillars in Microsoft's modern workplace approach. Do you want to talk us through high level on each of them? Obviously, we're looking at the bottom one on communication, but it's important for context around the whole stack and how this all intertwines to make it, that modern workplace we're talking about.
Absolutely. And, kind of the what we're talking about today is the sort of lower left quadrant, or sort of the bottom quadrant on the left-hand side, if I can put it that way. The sort of voice, your calling plans, direct routing, phone system stuff with Microsoft Teams. But, Microsoft's modern workplace encompasses those 4 things. So knowledge creation and sharing, information security and governance, communications at the bottom, and then business transformation. So knowledge creation and sharing, this is all about information architecture, your business design, how your documents flow within the organization. So your document management, who has access to what, your ability to co-author on documents, and versioning control. Collaboration, so related to sort of co-authoring as well, how you're working on those documents and what's the flow from your sort of inner circle, personal circle, and wider distribution in the organization. Yeah. Information security, so what are your policies? Do you have sensitivity labels set up on documents? Do you have confidential, highly confidential information that you're handling? How does that flow as that document moves around? Does it retain that kind of compliance within your organization? Yeah. And also in the security design and how you're accessing that information and on what devices. Then down at the bottom, the communication, sort of talking about modern meetings, everyone's doing meetings on Teams or Zoom or something similar. So, how do you make those meetings more effective before, during, and after the meeting so that, you get more stuff done? And then the digital channels, this is how we're communicating across the business, less around phone calls. There's lots of IM, there's channels, to a certain extent, email, which just refuses to die. I don't think it ever will. Mm-hmm. The voice, which we've already covered. And then business transformation, this is all about automation. So Microsoft's Power Automate, Power BI, Power Apps, the app suite in there to really sort of drive business functionality there.
Thanks, Mike. And I think it's important where we've seen, particularly in the last, over COVID, that those top 2 sections, knowledge creation, sharing, InfoSec, people have sort of had teams dumped upon them, if you will, put it so crudely. And now we've seen lots of IT teams and compliance teams sort of chasing the tails a little bit, going, God, we didn't even appreciate that files could be shared in Teams, across channels. So it's really important to go back and evaluate how are you defining those processes? How does voice in the channels play? And they, as I said, it intertwines to all those elements. So future sessions will absolutely touch on the other pillars. Of course, today is all about voice, but we wanted to set the scene around that modern workplace and how they all do line up when you're looking at Microsoft Teams as an end-to-end. So Mike, next part of the session is demystifying the types of ways of voice enabling Teams. So as I said at the beginning, you've got calling plans, which is from Microsoft directly. You've got direct routing in the middle, and new to the table is Operator Connect. Really briefly, Mike, why wouldn't a customer just go calling plan? What are the limitations with it, and why is everyone really concentrating on direct routing? And there's lots of reasons to do that, of course.
Sure. Firstly, I think maybe I'll explain, because I don't know what the knowledge is in the audience about what calling plans is. In order to enable calling within Microsoft Teams, you need a license, a phone system license for the users, and a calling plan if you're using Microsoft to be your carrier effectively. So essentially you're licensing your users to make calls. So you enable the feature with a phone system license, and then you buy calling plans. Now these calling plans are domestic or international. Okay, so you have to make a decision up front which users are going to be able to make calls and which users are going to make international calls. Now, there are complexities around what happens when you go out of the bundled minutes in those calling plans. So you have to buy things like communication credits, which you also use for people who don't have international calling but make international calls out of their sort of domestic calling plan. So you have complexity, you've got a management headache, and you've got cost. It doesn't stack up as a very cost-effective solution. So a lot of people are like, you know what, I've got a really good calling rate. I've got free bundle minutes with my existing carrier. I want to be able to use them. And very early on, Microsoft enabled this feature called direct routing. It's just the name for it, but fundamentally it means plugging in your own carriers into Microsoft Teams. So you bring your own numbers, your own calling plans, etc., with existing carrier relationships or any new relationships you want to set up. Now, Operator Connect is a sort of abstraction of direct routing, and what it's done is it's tried to simplify the onboarding of people into using direct routing in Microsoft Teams, because there's some complexities to it. So this is available to, I think it's only just launched, and I think there's sort of 11 operators in there, your big ones, your sort of BTs, etc. in there. And what it allows you to do is to sort of, through the Teams Admin Center, to sort of buy those services, and there's an element of automation in there to sort of make the process of onboarding calling via direct routing in a sort of simpler way. But we'll cover in more detail, at some point, what the difference is and why maybe Operator Connect would not work for you over something like direct routing could do.
Yeah, good point. I think that moves us on to the next slide around direct routing, and what we've seen: calling plans, Operator Connect, direct routing gives customers that true flexibility, and we'll elaborate more on that. So one of the things around direct routing, Mike, which is really, really important, is being able to connect or route calls between Teams and another, say, third-party on-prem PBX for any reason. Maybe it's a contact center that you might have running your core business, and being able to fluidly route calls between. Mike, do you want to just give the overview of how important the session border controller is in direct routing and why it's so important for those elements that we just talked about as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think first, just a quick introduction what a session border controller is. It's a voice specific security device, and it's designed to secure voice communications between your networks and other networks, and it's also a facilitator. So it does things like number normalization, codec normalization, all those clever things to allow different platforms to talk to each other and in a secure manner. So in order to get direct routing or Operator Connect, SBCs are used, although in Operator Connect it's slightly abstracted out for the end user. So in its basic form, we're taking the PSTN and a carrier, plugging that into an SBC in the middle, and that's the important thing. The SBC sits in the middle of everything, and then we're routing calls and numbers in and out of Microsoft Teams. This diagram showing here is just showing you that some of the other things you might want to connect into that. So you might have an on-prem system of some description that you can't drop for whatever reason, but you still need it to make calls. So you've got, let's say, a factory warehouse where you've got a complex DECT solution, or you've got a contact center, for example. So you're like, well, I'm going to move away I want to use Teams Voice, but actually want to retain all of those services as well. So maybe just my back office needs to be on Teams, but not my contact center, but I want to retain both. So what the SBC will do is it will actually bridge those services together. So your calls still traverse in and out through your carrier, come through the SBC, and the SBC makes that routing decision as to where that call is destined for. So if it's a Teams user dialing out to the PSTN, it routes it down to your carrier. If it's a Teams user calling into the the factory warehouse with a DECT, it will route it down to that on-prem legacy system that you might have in there that's driving that. And likewise, if you've got the contact center, you can link that into there. So you can create a sort of almost dial plan across your various services, and it'll 100% enable you to do all of these things.
Yeah, I think it's really key. And I mean, what we've seen bring to a lot of customers, very few customers have said we just purely want to go to Teams. Direct routing just gives you that extra leg to say, look, if there's anything legacy, if there's anything we need to bring into it, you can absolutely do it with SBCs, either hosted in the cloud and equally on-prem as well, which is another important thing for resilience and those local connectivity elements as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and just to follow up the point I was teased earlier about Operator Connect is Connect is a sort of you pick your carrier, you buy it, they deliver the numbers, you're configuring everything at that point. Those SBCs that they provide are locked down. You're not able to provide this kind of flexibility and control as we've depicted just here.
Yeah, and that brings us really nicely onto the next and last slide that we're presenting before going into a bit more of a conversation, Mike, is when you think about Teams managed services, and this is something that we've developed and we really appreciate, having the voice background where you need to consider the different sort of 5 pillars, if you will. When you look at things like Microsoft calling plans, yeah, you can buy the trunks, but Microsoft won't be there to help you configure the call flows, the user groups, all of the Power Automate elements. That's just not there, right? So unless you, as individuals, as IT team leaders, really know the back end of Teams, you're kind of still left in the lurch, and you may need a voice specialist to do it. So again, direct routing is giving us that ability. If I talk through the 5 pillars, Mike, we'll go into each of them in a little bit more detail. So Teams voice readiness. A key point here, I think the way that Teams natively runs over data and the internet versus, say, a traditional PBX where you may have VLANs on site going over private connections because of the way it routes over the internet. Talk us through the slight difference there in Teams and why it's really relevant that you probably need to consider going back to the office now, Teams versus, say, your traditional PBX.
Yeah, this is a really important decision point because it's all very well and go, you thinking that, I'm running a VoIP PBX system, what's the difference here? Well, the major difference is that the vast majority of your Teams traffic is going to be on the PC VLAN. Okay, it's not going to be segregated with your IP phones, etc. You can still run IP phones with Microsoft Teams, but what we're finding is that the vast majority of people are just moving to the soft phone clients. So what the major difference there is that whereas before you could segregate the traffic using VLANs, as you mentioned, now we're having to opt for prioritization on the data network. Okay, so you're going to have to deliver QoS through your Wi-Fi, through your data VLANs, all the way out through your switches, your routers, your firewalls. The trick with this is to get out to the internet as fast as you can. If you've got a big MPLS with centralized internet breakout, that's actually bad for Microsoft Teams voice and video and collaboration, because the way that they've deployed this globally is they need you to get to the Microsoft front door as fast as possible. And the best way is the local internet breakout. So there are a number of tools that you can use to sort of validate your setup with that. And even Microsoft provide a web page where you can actually run connectivity tests. And it doesn't have to be run by an admin, it can be run by an end user. All you have to do is go to connectivity.office.com and then get your users to sign in to that web page and run the connectivity test. As an admin within the 365 tenant, you can then review those tests. So if these users are at home, you can get an evaluation to the sort of performance and the routes that traffic's taking, the DNS, the hops, all sorts of things. It gives you a vast swathe of information, and you can really get a good picture as to how Teams is going to perform in your environments. Yeah,
so it's that just make sure the network's ready. It's a really key part, because anything on top of that is going to deliver a good experience, especially where we see this, hopeful return to the office in the coming months. Next part of the pillar, Mike, and again, having the knowledge of this, the tenant management in the back end. Again, going direct routing, the value we add to our customers. Talk us through what you and the team have done from an engineering perspective and our sort of delivery of Teams and things to think about from a customer from a tenant management perspective.
Absolutely. So you may have solved the direct routing piece and you've got your numbers, you've got the system, the SBC all configured in your tenant, but then you're still left with your Teams tenant and you're like, how do I set up a voice platform? Formation, we've been doing it for many years. Cumulatively, I hate to think what the number is. So we've got a lot of experience at configuring voice platforms, and Teams is no different. It just does things in a very Microsofty way, is probably the way my engineers describe it. So there's a certain nuances to how it's configured. Now, if I was just an IT guy and I had no voice experience, I'd be a little bit daunted about setting up call queues, auto tenants, resource accounts, room systems, all those things, learning some new PowerShell, what's an SBC, all those sorts of things. How do I add it in? So what we have developed is that we basically included within our service that we will actually deliver all of those components for the customer. So we'll do a workshop, so we work out how you want the system to operate. We'll give some advice as to how it differs from existing PBXs and what you should do maybe in place of that. And then how we work around things which are slightly legacy that you might need to try and incorporate into a Teams voice system. Good.
Yeah, I think having that voice background has really helped there to deliver it. Next two pillars we've kind of touched upon, but just very briefly, Mike, the direct routing and SIP trunking, basic things like number porting, right? It can be a pain. Having been there and done that, it's just knowing the nuances of doing that. Any other things between that and the SBC managed service that you'd like to call out as well?
Yeah, I think the point being is you don't just have to pick a single carrier. I mean, if you're an international company, you might have local carriers in local countries, and you should think about maybe delivering local SBCs in those regions to deliver the trunking. And Microsoft is very clever in its infrastructure with Microsoft Teams, so that you can do an element of least cost routing. So, if you've got UK office, New York office, Singapore office, and, call users in New York are dialing out to Singapore, you can break out of the Singapore SIP trunks in there. Now, that takes some setup. So this comes back to that Office 365 tenant management in terms of configuring that, because that just doesn't happen automatically. You need to understand how to configure that. Okay.
And then finally, I think the most important element, and I guess it's not overseen, but it's maybe something that people don't necessarily think about, is the end user training and adoption. We live in a world where we've all used Teams on a daily basis. Adding the voice call, you go, okay, it's got a dial pad, I can click the call, etc. What are the nuances, Mike? So if I've been used to a traditional PBX and I know the way it works, what have we really seen that's been really valuable in the user adoption and training part?
Yeah, and I think this was the surprise to us, is how popular the training and adoption really was. We got some great feedback about, from the businesses we've dealt with, and I'd suggest you heavily invest in this point, because it really, the success of your Teams voice deployment depends on making sure your staff know what they're doing, how to use it, etc. And it's really, really useful. I mentioned at the beginning that Teams is not a PBX replacement. It has voice facilities within a collaboration platform. So there's some nuances about how you hold and transfer calls, which should seem pretty obvious. But it's, when you show them that when they put a call on hold, rather than ringing someone to say, are you free to take this call, you're presented with the option to just IM them through Teams. So you've got that voice and IM capability as part of your transfer facility. We're all familiar about, creating group and conference calls on Microsoft Teams. So that's a given. But, it's just, it's more about the awareness of what you can do and how you can work differently and a bit more efficiently. And we're finding, people are really taking up extra training sessions just because they've been such a success.
Yeah, and I think the thing to consider is intuitive, but it's just that slight change of thought, isn't it? And as I said, get that right and built in with the stats in the back end of Microsoft, you can really start seeing a user adoption and reporting back to the business of how successful Teams deployment would be for your users and the usage and where people might need more training. Mike, an important piece here, and just going into what we see in, I guess with the other UCaaS vendors, we work, with the likes of 8x8 and RingCentral and Avaya, etc. And they, their biggest push at the moment, like everyone, people go, I want to integrate Teams. And what we've seen is, I guess, a dilution from their solutions, in that you're almost having to pay a tax to ultimately deliver their services into Teams. So RingCentral 8x8 have done loads of development, acquisition to developing their own collaboration backbones, equivalent to Teams. And they're now pushing, okay, we can integrate to Teams. You kind of just don't need to, right? We're seeing such an uplift in the R&D of Teams. Why would you go and pay for all those features in something like a Ring Central on 8x8 when ultimately Teams will deliver the same thing? It's native to Office 365. So if any of you are on the phone or on the webinar today looking at those services, I'd really pinpoint what of those 1,000,001 features they all do you really need when you're thinking about Teams. And I think that's quite an important piece that we're seeing ever erode. Microsoft really taking a march in that space, right?
Yeah, and I just want to be a bit careful here because, you know, a few slides back we were talking about integration with on-prem things and, you know, contact center and things like that. So I just want to point out that those are specific use cases where you've got that. So, you know, here is where we're talking about, you know, I want to use 8x8 for whatever reason, but I also want to use Teams. And yes, they offer some really clever integrations through the Teams clients, and, you know, it becomes invisible to the users. Fundamentally, it's just direct routing, and you're using an app within Teams to deliver that calling. So, you know, you are in a situation where you have two platforms to manage. You know, is that really how you want to manage it? You know, is the benefit of having both worth it? So, as you point out, you know, do you really need all those extra features? You know, what's the killer feature you're getting with it? So just think carefully, as if, you know, if it's absolutely crucial to your business, then yeah, you've got a good, you know, specific use case for it. But yeah, just be wary of those kind of we can do your Teams integration thing, because ultimately you are splitting the business for maybe unnecessary reasons.
Yeah, I think it's a key point. And Mike, one of the big things, again, this sort of race to Teams, the contact center integration. We've seen the likes of certified contact center providers on Microsoft Teams. The biggest blocker, and it's an API by Microsoft. Talk us about the presence issue, I guess, within Teams, and why contact centers can't truly integrate yet. What's that point about, Mark, when you think about a practical example?
Yeah. So I'm just going to take a step back here and just sort of go back to the training and adoption thing. One of the things we cover is really how Teams as a voice endpoint is very much user admin. You know, traditional PBX is admin, if I could put it that way. So if you wanted to make changes to call pickup groups, you'd go to the guy who programs the system to set it up for you. In Microsoft Teams, you're managing your call pickups, your delegates, yourself. All right. So you're also managing whether you take or receive, you can take calls or not through your presence. So what we've got here is the ability for a user to say, you know what, I'm not taking a call. That presents a problem in a contact center environment, which cannot, at the moment, until the APIs are mature, change the status of a user so that they're always available to take a call.
Really important, isn't it? I think that the whole ebbs and flows of a contact center, team leaders, supervisors, they should be able to bring agents in and out of queues depending on spikes, etc. And if you've got a bunch of agents that are decided they're not available, much harder to bring a contact center into it. So I think that the note here is watch this space. So many providers trying to get there with the contact center, and I think it's a matter of time before it happens. But right now, any of the providers that are saying you get a true contact center with Teams, really read into it, look at the detail behind it, and again, direct routing would address that, because you've got a pure play contact center that's not, you know, just answering a call in Teams. You know, there's not a lot of value in that. So it's something to watch out for. And again, we'll run further sessions on that in a lot more detail. Now, Mike, I appreciate we're nearly at the half-an-hour point, so 5 minutes on the last couple of points, which I think are really, really relevant. Unknown, I think, if you go to Teams Voice, like we've seen in the video side of things, I can record my video sessions. When you go to Teams Voice, that recording function that we're all used to in the video out of the box isn't there. What's the answer if we've got customers on the call today that want or need compliance, say legal, financial reasons, they need proper call recording, being able to target individuals that maybe need some of their call recording options? It's available. What are the options on it, Mike, from a recording perspective?
Yeah, just to elaborate on your point, the one-to-one and group and, you know, meeting call recording is there. It's built in for Microsoft Teams. As soon as you deliver a PSTN call into Microsoft Teams, that option disappears. Okay, so, you know, first step is when you're dealing with PSTN calling, the recording option disappears. So you need to think about what kind of recording capabilities you need. Have you just been recording calls for training purposes and you just, you know, need it to refer back to calls and things like that? Or do you actually have some compliance? Are you taking credit card payments? Do you have to keep recordings of your transactions for some FCA regulations? You know, there are thankfully certified call recording platforms out there with Microsoft Teams, and they are as good as the ones you get on traditional PBXs. You know, the way that it records is incredibly clever. I mean, there are various ways to do it. Some integrate with the SBC to take a feed of the calls using a technology called SIPRAC. Some use bots, and the bot recording is essentially, it gets conferenced into all of your calls and records it by merit of the fact that it was a member of the call as it was going on.
So option is, it's absolutely available. So the native recording out of Teams isn't available, but there are lots of options on recorders. If you really are looking at Teams Voice and you say you are a compliant business, you need to have recording. Absolutely, don't be scared of it. It can be brought, and it's very, very good and solid. Gives you all the search functionalities, annotating recordings, all the, you know, stepping into quality management, etc. You might expect in that traditional world. And then reporting, Mike, out of the box. Obviously, Power BI is a thing. What about if I want maybe more of a call logger in the traditional sense? Same thing, I can do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So from the starting at the very basics, the Teams tenant gives you effectively usage analytics. What I would describe about them is that they're static. Really, you pick, and it's just like, I want to see the calls for the last 28 days. Boom, there they are. You know, if you're going to, I want to filter it per group, or, you know, have some, you know, drill down into those calls, or I want to see the cradle to grave of those calls. You don't have those options. There are some Power BI reports that they now give for calls that came into auto tenants and hung groups, etc. And, you know, they're an improvement, but again, they're a little bit lacking in terms of their capabilities. So you should really just consider if reporting and metrics is something that you need. Thankfully, much like the call recording, there are companies out there who've solved these problems for you, and Microsoft have opened up the Graph API, and you can take out this information and really build some very, very good reporting with Microsoft Teams. And the great thing about it is it's not just reporting on voice, it's reporting on voice, video, one-to-one calls, you know, meetings, you know, all those sorts of things, cradle to grave. So you can actually see the journey of those calls and can break those down. So some really clever reporting options available to you. Yeah,
and again, this is all things that you'd miss out on, say, a Microsoft calling plan. You'd have to go and work all this stuff out. So again, whether you're looking at whichever provider is doing direct routing, expect these different modules to come into it to really enhance the end-to-end service. Okay, and Mike, I guess just to end the call, your final advice. These headsets, where we've been working in a quiet home, what's your biggest advice to those people that maybe use Apple AirPods? I was guilty of it. Talk to us about active noise cancelling and something that really is going to affect your team's experience when we go back to the office.
100%, Mike. You've nailed it really with that. Everyone's been at home using their little plug-in headphones. I think this is working fine. You know, I can hear everyone. They can hear me. It's all good, apart from the dog barking every now and again. You go back into an office. We've got a busy, bustling office with people on their own calls. You know, all that noise is just going to project straight down into your voice and video calls, and people are going to go, can you mute please, can you mute please, can you mute please, because there's no active noise cancellation on your microphone, only for your headphones. So you're hearing it fine, but everyone else is getting all your background noise. So the difference between those kind of headsets you get with your mobile phone is that, and the ones you're wearing there, Mike, is that that's actually picking up the background noise and filtering it out of the transmit. Okay, so your video experience and your voice experience will be superior with a Teams certified headset.
Yeah, massive point. And you know, move away from this headset option. Really think about the headset option. It's going to make such a difference to the usability and the adoption within the physical office space, if we call it that. So without further ado, Mike, thank you very much for the session. Folks that joined, really appreciate your time. If there are any questions, as I said, please enter them into the chat. We'll keep the bridge open for the next 10 minutes. Or if you want to raise your hand or have any one-to-one questions, more than happy to address those. But otherwise, I'd like to say thank you so much for your time. Hope you found the session useful. As I said, feedback's welcome. If there's topics you want us to go into in a lot more detail, please do let us know. And we'll be running these sessions on a month's basis moving forward. Other than that, have a lovely rest of the week. Sun is shining. We'll see you all soon. Just going to monitor the chat window for a minute, Mike. Okay, please don't be shy if you do have any questions. Thank you, Anthony. Question coming in now from a couple of folks. Carl, you've rightly put a question there. If you guys do want to follow up, then absolutely you can come directly to ask us sort of one-to-one sessions. We can do further demos, workshops, you know, talk to the team. As I said, we'll be sending out the recording links after, and no doubt putting in sort of a courtesy call just to make sure we get feedback. But yeah, come and engage, come and ask the questions, even if it's more for information. Happy to share and hopefully help you on your Microsoft journey. Thanks, Carl. See, Ash is writing as well. Yes, Ash, thank you. Really appreciate your time, sir, and we'll speak to you next Wednesday. So Anthony there, what solution would suit best if you need contact center functionality and looking to make use of investment within the next 6 months? Good question, Anthony. I think it's about looking at, I guess with direct routing, you can ultimately use any contact center you want. And I think the thing to be considerate of is that a contact center really, if you're an agent doing a job, you kind of don't want them probably in Teams, talking to pals, instant messaging each other, being distracted with meetings. If you're a contact center agent in the traditional sense, you should be there to field calls or field those interactions. So people like the Genesises of the world, 8x8 of course have a contact center, Nice in Contact, Avaya, all of those folks that still do contact center really well, absolutely utilize them. And where the direct routing can come in is you can still route your calls between Teams and contact center, but kind of use contact center for what it is today and a platform that does the job. I'd say it's still very immature in trying to just push calls to a Teams client and expect it to work as a contact center. It's ever evolving, as we said. But you know, there's some really feature-rich platforms at a good price point now, such as Genesis, that will really help you fit the bill and really enhance your customer experience across all those channels that you may be looking at as well. Hopefully that answers the question, Anthony. If not, more than happy to talk to you further about all that sort of stuff and really understand, I guess, the nuances of what you're trying to do and how that would work. Okay, I think that's it from questions, but as I said, thank you very much. We'll shut down the session now, and I wish you all a pleasant rest of the week. Cheers for joining. Bye-bye.
Bye.